I think my big concern actually is that written communication seems to be getting shorter and shorter and often less and less thoughtful. Twitter is awesome for getting short bursts of ideas back and forth, but for nuanced and thoughtful discussion, it kind of sucks. And I just hope that, the long-form, thoughtful emails of my youth don't go completely by the wayside. So I guess in this one way, I'm perhaps stodgy and conservative. I like short form too, but I worry that the long-form stuff will go away.
But I think actually, in a way, that this has to do with the fact that we still don't really have a very good, solid paradigm to present longer texts in on these screens. So if you're reading something, the sort of getting the sense where you are and how much you still get, to have to go ahead, it's still not really solved. So there are basically usability issues and design questions that need to be solved, not necessarily with fonts themselves. The fonts are fine; they're actually not the problem. The text design and the notion of what's a good format in terms of book. What should be the book? I have a problem. I know, there's a long text, you scroll, then you do something else on an iPad, then you jump back to the app and it scrolls back to the top and you don't know where you were. So
I think, though, that some of this, I think, has been solved adequately. Proportional sizing of the little scroll bar, indicator in the scroll
True.
bar. For things like email and so on, it's good enough. Now, for books, well, that's, I would agree that some of the ebook problems have not been fully solved in that regard. And, I still can't thumb through an ebook, at least not in a useful way. That's a different thing. I'm just thinking of like personal communication.
But actually, of course, the number, I think these days we have like about 50 billion texts and instant messages sent every day between people, and like about 1 in 7 people at least in the earth has a smartphone. So actually text communication as itself is much more happening than it ever has. Most people just talked. People who actually did write. There was a very small portion in all societies, in some almost none, in some maybe 10-20% on a daily basis. And today you have very young people and seniors who actually use SMS, and that means that fonts, text by itself, also the written form of language, and all these new inventions like emoji, they're actually being adopted. It's a superbly vibrant means of communication. I think we actually write. As a globe, we write more than we ever have. It's just a different form of communication.
Right. Oh, there's a lot more writing, but the average, the number of written communications is skyrocketing. The average length of those written communications is shrinking. It's approximating. It's going down towards zero, right?
Although, if you think of it that way, you can actually it might be true that the number of longer texts that were available 20 years ago, it actually stayed. It just that a massive amount of short messages came on top. But so the proportion shrinks. But maybe, the number of people who have something significant to say in a longer form, and also those who read the longer forms, I would say it hasn't changed that much. At least, I don't know any research about that. But
I'm not convinced. I suspect that, the number of long emails you write may be the same.
Yes,
but I suspect that across everyone who's doing written communication, I think the average length is still shrinking.
Well, the simple answer is that the most unknown thing is us not releasing Fontlab 6 for quite a long time.
That's true.
Right there.
That's something that we've. But also, I have a thing, and it is about HTML. And that's that, these new forms of communication, especially when everything moves to the web and to these web techniques, and they work so that as a designer and as a programmer, as a developer, currently, when you're making something using HTML and CSS, you can influence the position of every single graphic element within graphic on the page, but actually the text is just, here starts the text, here ends the text, this is the rectangle, fill it. But there's no way of sort of fine-tune control. So it's very difficult, and you have to use bizarre workarounds to, if you want precise control, if you want to do things like, let's say, mathematical equations, or some text that is really rich where you actually really want to influence the exact positioning of all the letter fonts and glyphs. It's currently not at all possible because the browser, it can use a web font, but it cannot look easily inside the font and basically take every single character and do something with it. So the text is actually the text on the web is rather dumb in the sense that it's just give this paragraph a style or maybe this word, but then the browser does something. So the design, so I think that's where there's going to be, some changes in this respect, and basically, because people are much more focused, web designers are much more focused on text right now. They used to be more interested in like graphics, but now it's, text. They're looking into it, so there's going to be solutions. And I like it because, the web platform is almost there as a very high quality delivery mechanism for text, but actually quite not yet. So browser development in terms of text support, I think we'll see some great progress there.
In my dreams, there is no such thing as font, because there are quite a few technologies that have been inherited from the metal type times. And one of them is a conception of font as a collection of characters. And now when we deal with multilingual text and all these features and download times for browsers, etc., the whole conception of font is just wrong. It should be just a database of characters or glyphs that you can access, and then you kind of link it to the font in a virtual way. So your font is created when you need it. It's not existing as a fixed thing. And also the thing with metrics, I think that it should change, because it's also a thing called a metal type.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
We were just having this discussion last night where the argument was being made that this whole idea that a letter, as instantiated in a font, should have some fixed width with specific sides. Yeah. Really the correct spacing of a letter is related to the letters around it, and that interaction should define the space allocated to each letter.
In metal
rather than anything to do with assigning space.
In metal times, the face, right, of the glyph sat on this rectangular block, the body, but now we only have the face. We actually only see the image, and there is still these virtual rectangles that are used everywhere in text composition, but they wouldn't have to be rectangles. And I also have this one thing about, my dream font format is that, among others, you can have some glyphs that the designer drew and they just need to be shown. But actually, in many, many cases, it would be great if we had a format that would be a program rather than something static. So the glyph would know, the character would know how to draw itself. You say, okay, this is the space, fill it. And then the font or the glyph kind of does something. So the app does not have to know much about the font. The font draws itself and fills the space.
We've seen some beginnings of this. You see cases, for instance, like the classic problem is the lowercase f has a stupid hanging over hook. And if the next letter has an ascender, well, maybe you have to design a ligature for every one of those next letters. But the other thing you could do is, contextually have the amount of hook on your F depend on whether it's running into something. And some people are designing fonts that way and having to program in the extra open type smarts to actually make it work. And things like that, I think, are really a fascinating venue for future exploration. But if it all
another thing is black-white property of the font. It's also inherited from the metal types when we have ink and paper, so we only can have one color. And if you look around, you rarely look on a paper. You usually look on a screen, and all screens are capable to show multiple colors. So I think that single color property of the font should go away and be replaced by.
It should be a special case.
Yeah,
there should
just a special case. Like when you do a logotype, you make a colored version and sometimes dynamic version, but you also make a black-white version. And I think that in the future, black-white font will be just a special case of a font or a collection of glyphs.